Hey guys, welcome to Trail Talk MTB, and today we're doing a review on my long-term test bike, the Bird Aeris AM9. So I've been with this bird now for around about 6 months. We took a romantic trip down to Tasmania, rode the beautiful trails in Derby as well as Medina, and I've done riding all over Sydney with her as well. Fair bit of enduro riding as well as a fair bit of trail and all mountain riding as well. So why did I pick the Bird as my long-term test bike for the past 6 months? Well, I wanted a bike that could really do it all. I know there's no such thing as that, but I tend to favour the more descending side of things in terms of all mountain bikes. So I want a bike that I could do most enduro and all mountain trails on and still be able to have a relatively fun time on the more peddly trails around Sydney. So a bit about Bird first. So Bird's based in Eversley in North Hampshire in England. The bikes are designed there and they're constructed in Taiwan, and then the frames are sent back to there where they're built up. The interesting thing about Bird, they're being direct to consumer as well. However, you can spec the bikes as you want. You can buy the frame only like I did here at a really good price, or you can spec them up the way you want. So they have plenty of options from Fox and RockShox. If you want to build the suspension up, you can do it however you want, and also Shimano SRAM drivetrains, and as well as many brake options such as Hope, Shimano and SRAM as well. So you can really spec the bike how you want, and there's plenty of options as well. So a bit about the construction. I chose the raw finish. I think it looks awesome and it really does showcase those welds on the frame. You can tell it is a really strong frame. Riding as well, you notice how stiff it is, but not too stiff that it's unforgiving. But yeah, as you can tell, this finish is pretty awesome, and it is a really well built bike. So it is a 29er, boost front and rear, room for 2.5 inch tyres in the rear. It's also got a thread and bottom bracket, and as well as external cable routing for your home mechanics. I don't mind having external cable routing, it makes things easy. It might not look as neat, but I definitely appreciate it. And you can also fit a water bottle in the bigger frames. I noticed on my medium large that I could only fit the Canyon Eject hydration system, so they're two small water bottles side by side. You can squeeze small water bottles in, but I wanted a pretty large volume of water. You can also use, there's wolf tooth components that have two water bottles side by side and they spread them apart, and that clears the reservoir in the shock. So if you don't have a reservoir in your shock, an external one, then you should be able to fit a decent water bottle, no problems. Okay, so now onto the geometry of the bike. That seems to be what's most important these days. Starting with the travel, we've got 150 in the rear, 150 in the front. I do see a lot of people going 160 in the front, and it would complement the bike very well because it does descend very well, as we'll talk about soon. But Bird does also include static as well as sag measurements. We'll go off the static because that's what most other companies do. So head angle, we've got 65.5. In your seat angle, you've got 76 degrees, so nice and steep. Your chainstays is 340, so it complements that seat angle very well. Places you really in the center of the bike, and gives you unbelievable traction when you're climbing, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. Reach in the medium long, which I have, is 475, which is a little bit bigger than most larges out there, even in the medium long, and the large reach is around about 500 millimeters, which is very out there. I'm 6'1", I chose the medium long because I wanted something that wasn't too long. The wheelbase in the medium long is around about 1240, which for my riding in Sydney is more than ideal. So a bit about the suspension now. It is a horse link bike. Now you're going to say another horse link, but I feel like it is a really good example of one. It uses a 65mm stroke, and as well as bearings in the lower mount as well. So a bit about the performance. It is a progressive shock curve. It does feel progressive towards the end. Doesn't feel harsh in any kind of way. It does feel smooth, which does mean that it is coil compatible if you do want to run a coil. But the big thing about this suspension, because it does use a pretty long stroke shock for 150mm travel, so 65mm stroke, that does mean it has a lower than average leverage ratio, which usually means a lot of control and support, however at a sacrifice for sensitivity. I don't find this the case on this bike at all. With those lower bearing mounts, and as well as the new metric shocks, I feel like it is super sensitive, and really good small bump compliance as well. But where it really does shine is that mid-stroke support. You can push this bike really hard through the mid-stroke, going through corners, and then going over really harsh rock sections. It really does feel supportive, and it never bottoms out hard because of that progressive shock curve. Super supportive, that's the main takeaway from this bike. Other than that setup, I'm running around about 30% sag seated. I felt like that was perfect. And then rebound, I'm running one off fully open. So lighter riders than me, I weigh around about 82, fluctuate around 85 depending how much I've eaten for the day. Lighter riders than me will need to run the rebound pretty much fully open, or need to kind of mess around with the shock shin a little. But for me, anyone kind of 75 to 90 kilos, I think that would be perfect. Yeah. So a bit about the specs of this bike. I'm not going to go into too much about it because I've spec'd it the way I wanted, and Bird kind of has a few different spec options than what I've put on here. But just for argument's sake, I've got an MRP ribbon air at the front. The bike is stopped by Magura MT5s. I've got a 200mm rotor at the front, 180 in the rear. Full GX Eagle drivetrain, X-Fusion Matic dropper post. Got some Hope bling, seat post and stem. I'm running a 50mm stem with a medium-large frame. If I was running the large frame, then I'd probably put a 30 or a 35mm stem to kind of keep the effective top tube and reach kind of similar between them. Other than that, ODI grips, and that's pretty much it. Also running, Trail King, Continental Trail King tires in the rear, and I am running a De Baron Project up the front, both in 2.4s. I'll do individual reviews on most of these in the future, and if you wanted to leave any questions about them, you can put them in the comments. So a bit about the climbing, not my favourite part of any ride, but something you have to do to get to the top. In terms of, I think the geometry is the main factor that makes this bike climb the way it does. There is decent levels of anti-squat that kind of give a good pedaling platform. It's not the levels found on, say, DW bikes or Switch Infinity bikes, the Yetis, but it is a really good pedaling platform. I don't feel like I need to lock it out unless I'm kind of on a big fire trail climb. But the geometry is what helps it the most. So because there's those 340 chainstays, I think a lot of bikes, they're too short, so 430, especially with steep seat angles or even the slack seat angles, just doesn't put you in an ideal position. With the steep seat angle with those moderate chainstays, it puts you really central in the bike. So you don't feel like you need to scoot forward to kind of get traction. There's plenty of traction in the rear. And I never really feel like I have to get out of the saddle and really push forward over the bike to get over more technical sections. Now onto descending. I really did like the way the bike descended. You notice immediately how balanced the suspension feels and how central you feel on the bike. Even with me downsizing to the medium-large, I did feel like there was still bucket loads of stability. The wheelbase is still 1240 millimeters, so it's still really long. But I never felt like it was too cumbersome. There is definitely a good balance between stability and agility. This is aided by the low standover and seat tube on the bike, so you really feel like you can place it and maneuver it where you want to. And aided by that real support in the mid-straight, you can kind of pop it and place it where you want to, which is really rare for a bike that is this long. Kind of feels like a Mini 29er BMX bike. I know that sounds a bit stupid, but you can really maneuver this bike around considering the wheelbase. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but because of that mid-stroke that they've built into the kinematics of the suspension, it really does give the bike that sprightly feeling when you're pedaling. And if you want to boost off certain obstacles on the trail or really push through a corner, you can really do that. It definitely does feel like you've got more suspension than you actually do. You really notice that when you're plowing through rock gardens or coming off drops kind of around about 1.5 to 2 meters. Just absorbs that, and then you can just, out of those sections, you can just put in a few pedal strokes and you just feel that support in the mid-stroke and it just propels you forward. So the only real negative I came across with descending, which is currently in part to my fault, in really steep sections, kind of in the bike park, when I was in Medina, I did notice that I was kind of a bit over the front of the bike, but I think that really comes down to I did need probably the large in those situations, but in most of the situations that I was in, I definitely would prefer the medium-long frame. So yeah, it's kind of, what do you prefer? If you're racing enduro professionally, I'd go towards the larger frame, what Bird recommends, but if you do kind of a larger, do fairly different riding all the time, so trail or mountain as well as some enduro riding and some downhill stuff, then I would err on the side of the shorter frame and then run it with something like a 45 or 50mm stem. For me, it's been perfect. So how does the bike compare? So done a comparison to two bikes, starting with the Nukeproof Mega 290, which was my old bike about a year ago. That bike felt like it had maybe a little bit more stability. I think that came down to the 450mm chainstays on the Nukeproof. This does have a longer reach than the Nukeproof. So yeah, in some sections I still felt the Nukeproof was a little bit more stable, but when it comes to agility, the Bird definitely takes it. And I felt probably a bit more comfortable with a bit more reach on the Bird. But I think it comes down to the Nukeproof in terms of the suspension. Doesn't feel like there's a lot of mid-stroke support. Even with the coil, I still felt like I was blowing through the travel pretty easily. So going over sections, it just bottomed out a lot. And then if you add a lot of volume spaces, what I did with the air shock, just made the bike feel awful, really. So as an all-round bike, I probably would take the Bird. It's definitely got that mid-stroke's definitely the highlight, and the geometry is a bit more comfortable. Overall, I was probably a fair bit faster on the Bird, especially going over more technical sections. It was only in super high-speed sections that I did notice the Nukeproof was a bit more stable. And then comparing to my old Norco Sight 29, it's marketed as an all-mountain bike, but when you compare it to something like this, it would be more like a trail bike, and I feel like that's more of a shorter travel all-mountain bike. You can still do everything on it, but when it comes to comparing it to the Bird, stability-wise, the Bird's definitely better. Descending, you just notice the suspension performance is a lot better on the Bird. Climbing-wise, still felt like I was probably a bit faster on the Bird because I'm a bit more central on the bike. The Sight probably felt a little bit more agile, so if you're in more trail situations most of the time, then you probably lean more towards the Sight. But for all mountain riding, and if you lean more towards the descending side of things, I think the Bird would be a better option. So who should buy this bike? I think someone who wants an all mountain bike that errs on the side of descending rather than climbing. And if you've got more big climbs with big descents rather than undulating terrain, I think more of a shorter travel bike would be better for that. But if you want a bike that you can really do big climbs on all day and then do a big descent at the end, I think the Bird would be a good option. And if you were racing enduro, the larger frame would definitely be absolute weapon. But in the shorter build that I've done, I feel like it's a perfect all-mountain bike for most situations. So long story short, as you can tell, I really like the bike. If you'd like to check out a more in-depth written review, you can head over to trailtalkmtb.com. I'll leave the link in the description. And if you like the review, give it a like. And if you want to hear more reviews like this, subscribe to the channel. Thanks, guys.